In recent weeks, the world has been shocked to find out that rich people don't like paying tax. A tsunami-sized leak from Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca gave us all a tiny insight into the secretive dealings of dictators, Downing Street residents, and douchebags. And while the Panama Papers are significant, it's worth noting that A, Panama is just one of around 50 tax havens used worldwide. 2, we've only seen a small fraction of the information released so far. And fourthly, the information is being controlled by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is funded by a veritable lineup of some of the wealthiest individuals in human history, including the Rockefellers, George Soros, and the Kellogg's. And while everyone's busy expressing outrage over criminal avoidance of tax, here at The Undercurrent, we're way more pissed off about the legal and more or less out in the open ways that multinational corporations avoid paying tax in the countries from which they generate staggering profits. So in the interests of a level playing field, we humbly present to you The Undercurrent Guide to Legal Tax Evasion. Now, we realise that the topic of taxation is almost as boring as a Coldplay Super Bowl performance, so we thought it would help to put a human face on the issue. We've enlisted the services of a local startup company helmed by our good friend Liam. Liam's been enjoying a recent surge in revenue, supplying artisanal confetti to hipster weddings, but he feels like giving away 35% of his profits to the government isn't funny. Not even like, ironically funny. So let's see if we can do something to get that rate closer to 0%. Our first technique we'll call offshore registration. Let's just say Scissor and Page are based over in the US, where companies pay 35% tax on profits. Now in the US, you pay tax where your company is registered, while over in Ireland, you pay tax on where your company is physically based, at only 12.5%. So we'll keep Liam's headquarters in the US, but shift his company registration over to Ireland. It sounds tricky, but it's just a bit of paperwork. And we know Liam loves paper. So with that simple bit of admin, we've saved you 22.5% in tax using offshore registration. But we're just getting started. Time to level up with a technique called transfer pricing. Now Liam's planning for success, and he'll be expecting to ship hand-filled mason jars of paper shrapnel all over the world to countries like Australia. But how much would it suck if he had to pay the 30% company tax that Australia expects? Easy fix. Let's set you up a subsidiary in Singapore where you only pay 2.5% tax on profits. Liam's Singapore arm sells his products to his Australian subsidiary at a price very close to what the customer will pay in store. That means that all the profits accumulate in Singapore at just 2.5% instead of back in Australia at 30%. So now you're legally holding on to 97.5% of those sweet, sweet profits using a technique called transfer pricing, which if anyone else did it would be called money laundering. But we can do better. It's time for a tax haven. And Panama is not your only option. There are tons of killer spots with flaccid taxation laws waiting to receive your profits. Like Luxembourg, where you can literally tell the government how much tax you'd like to pay. Now, thanks to the leaks at Mossack Fonseca, we know that tax havens exist, but how are they used? Well, with a holding company in Luxembourg, you can do all kinds of fun things, like sell your own ideas back to yourself. Or, my favourite, the ultimate corporate circle jerk, debt loading. Your Luxembourg holding company can loan money to all your subsidiaries, like Australia, and they pay the money back at huge interest rates. And this achieves two things. It shifts all your profits in the form of interest payments back to Luxembourg, who deem them to be 100% tax-free. And it cooks the books at your Australian subsidiary, reducing their profits down to zero or even below. So once again, that's a technique known as debt loading, which is basically loan sharking within a human centipede. Now let's not forget, these techniques aren't limited to artisanal desiccated paper companies. Let's look at a few real-world examples. Let's start with Google, upon whose website most of you are probably watching this video right now. In 2014 in Australia, they generated $2 billion of advertising revenue, on which they paid $5 million tax in Singapore. And Facebook, upon whose page the rest of you are probably watching this video. In 2014, the UK government paid Facebook more money to run ads that encouraged people to pay tax than Facebook paid in tax themselves. But no one embodies selfish, evasive tax policy better than Apple. In 2015 in Australia, they booked $8 billion in revenue. That's a lot of money for a company that sells a phone with a battery that doesn't even last a single day, whilst abandoning the creative community that kept them solvent during the 90s. And God forbid they should ever access their gigantic cash reserves to hire enough software engineers to properly beta test their software so that when you do a software update, you don't risk stabilizing your... And how much tax did Apple pay on that $8 billion of revenue? $85 million, which represents 1%. A recent report showed that 76 of the top 100 Australian companies pay a lower tax rate than a nurse. And the other 24 companies weren't model citizens either. They're just better at using the loan sharking centipede to magically turn their profits into a loss. Lost tax revenue on the profits that we know about amounted to $5.36 billion, which would be enough to reverse all the recent funding cuts to aged care, Medicare, Indigenous services, our two public broadcasters, national rental housing affordability, and the main body tackling climate change in Australia, the CSIRO, with $2.5 billion left over. But thanks to pansy-ass governments all over the world, public corporations are able to shift the tax burden onto private citizens. You know what? I'm over this shit. We make these funny little videos and, you know, they're a little bit of fun. We tell some fart jokes, we pillory some politicians, but at the end of the day, do you think we really make a difference? Probably not. So why don't we see if we can? Hashtag iPhone 7 boycott. Because you know there's another one coming out soon, and you know it's only going to be a small incremental improvement on a product that was once revolutionary, and you know you don't really need it. And since our governments are too gutless and conflicted to hold these hoarding, Ayn Rand reading douche canoes to account, maybe it's up to all of us. So when Tim Cook offers us the iPhone 7, let's all send him a message on our iPhone 6s, iPhone 6s, iPhone 6 Pluses and iPhone 6s Pluses. Dear Tim, you'll get our money when we get yours. Tell your friends.